Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Nonprofit U, a forum where nonprofit stakeholders can share lessons learned and discuss the latest developments in the industry. My name is Valerie, Leonard, your host. I'm a consultant to nonprofits, and I specialize in community and organizational development. I work with nonprofit organizations to help them make a stronger impact to their clients and communities. You can find Nonprofit U on Facebook and Twitter, and I encourage you to follow us and to comment early and often. Today's hashtags are Nonprofit U, HSI, BEW, and Westside Triage. You can also leave comments on blogtalkradio.com/nonprofit_U. The chat room is open, and you can post comments and questions. In order to use the chat room, you must open a listener-only account. You'll find a link to open the account on the page for this episode. You can also email me questions at consulting@valeriefleonard.com. We'll be taking questions by phone and from our chat room at about the 30-minute mark or so. The call-in number is 347-884-8121. In the event that you didn't hear me, you will see that phone number on the episode page. Today's topic is mobilizing the community to tackle trauma and opioid addiction. We'll talk about the creation of the Westside Community Triage and Wellness Center, and that center was developed in partnership with the Cook County Health and Hospital Systems, Bobby E. Wright Comprehensive Behavioral Health Center, and Habilitative Systems, Inc. We'll also talk about community-based approaches to trauma, violence, and the opioid crisis. Again, we encourage you to call in with questions at about the 30-minute mark. You can start posting in the chat room right now and emailing questions. Again, my email address is consulting@valeriefleonard.com. If you want to participate in the live chat, you must open an account, and the link is found on the episode page right underneath the chat room. Again, the call-in number is 347-884-8121. Nonprofit and community development professionals, as well as policymakers, especially those who are involved in behavioral health, are especially encouraged to call in and share your stories and strategies. We would also love to hear from people who may have had issues with substance abuse themselves. If you know someone who has had issues with substance abuse, either in your family, in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. So since that takes at least half of the population in the United States, I am expecting to get many, many calls. So according to a recent study by the Pew Research Center, about 46% of Americans have a friend or family member addicted to drugs. Issues of substance abuse drive mental and physical health. Domestic violence and crime impact family unity, work productivity, employment status, public health, public safety, education, and just about every fiber of our social fabric. According to a report established by the White House Council of Economic Advisors in November, the estimated cost of opioid epidemic is over $500 billion. That's billion with a B, and that's taking into account the cost of health care costs for treatment, criminal justice and law enforcement, reduced compensation, lost employment, and premature death. So this represents the cost related to the opioid crisis alone and doesn't include other substance abuse issues or related issues. So today's guests are Donald J. Dew. He's the president and CEO of Habilitative Systems, Inc., and Dr. Rashad Saaphir, president and CEO of the Bobby E. Wright Comprehensive Behavioral Health Center. I'll let each of them come to you in their own way and introduce themselves. So, Donald, we'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to work for HSI and some of the accomplishments?
Surely, and thank you so much for the opportunity today, Valerie. I was born and raised on the west side of Chicago, and I had the opportunity to work at the Mile Square Health Center years ago with persons such as Mrs. Dolores Exum and Dr. Anderson Freeman and many other young African-American professionals during that day and time. I went on to attend Lewis University in Romeoville, Illinois, majored in social work, attended the University of Illinois Jane Addams College of Social Work also, and achieved my master's in social work degree there. Since that time, after graduation, I've also been employed with the Community Mental Health Council and actually came to HSI back in 1984 and served as its first director of case coordination.
Wow. And look at you now. How large is the organization now?
Yeah, we've actually, as an organization, been around since 1978. We grew out of Clare Christian United Methodist Church as part of their community ministry. The staff has grown from just 3 programs in 1978 to over 40 programs currently in 2018. Over 100 staff, a budget in excess of $7 million. And, some of the accomplishments that I think have been noteworthy during this time is HSI was one of the largest providers of child welfare services, dealing with the disproportionate number of African-American children within the foster care system for a number of years, 12 or 20 years. Built over, we've constructed at least 160 units of housing for people with disabilities and seniors, funded primarily by HUD and City of Chicago Department of Housing, to the tune of about $20 million, and been involved in any number of different major initiatives over the years, over the last 40 years, as we celebrate our 40th anniversary this year, from welfare to work to infant mortality reduction initiatives, the deinstitutionalization of persons with disabilities from various state institutions, and, of course, the Affordable Care Act.
Excellent, excellent. And thank you very much, Donald. Dr. Saaphir, the same for you. Let us know a little bit about your background, how you came to work for Bobby E. Wright Comprehensive Behavioral Health Center, and some of the organization's accomplishments.
Okay. Thank you, Valerie, for having me on this afternoon. I received my PhD in clinical community psychology with a specialization in mental health in 1976 from the University of Utah. And believe it or not, the University of Utah was one of the first programs in the country following passage of the Community Mental Health Centers Act to offer such a program. So very early in my career, I knew that community mental health was something that I really wanted to be involved in. So I've worked in community mental health in various capacities since 1976. I started out in 1976 as Director of Research and Evaluation for a mental health center in Memphis. And following that stint of employment, I became the chair of the psychology department at Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia. It was while I was at Norfolk State that I was approached during the Carter administration to do what's called an intergovernmental personnel assignment. So I went to Washington to work on national research projects on racism and mental health. And I also managed a that was called the 2% Technical Assistance Program, which provided technical assistance to community mental health centers that were engaged in deinstitutionalizing persons with chronic mental illness from state-operated facilities back into community-based care. And it was really during that time that I came to know the late Dr. Bobby Wright. He and I, developed a friendship. And after President Carter lost the election to Ronald Reagan, my time in Washington came to a close, and so Dr. Wright, in his very persuasive manner, convinced me to come to Chicago. So I came to Chicago in 1981, and I have been here at the agency in one capacity or another for the past 37 years. I became the president and CEO in February of 2013. So that's kind of my background and where I come from. In terms of the agency accomplishments, one of the major things that we've been able to do is to maintain the comprehensive nature of the services that were previously funded by federal grants. Even through the transition to fee-for-service, we have maintained a full array of services for persons with mental health related disorders and substance abuse, including those with developmental disabilities. One of our more recent accomplishments is we implemented an evidence-based supportive employment program. It's called IPS, which stands for Individual Placement and Support. It's an evidence-based program that was developed out of Dartmouth University, and our agency was selected to participate in that program. We employ people within our agency who have serious mental illness. We provide them with training, and we place them with employers in the community. We did so well during the first year of the program. We were awarded an international award for the best IPS program. Wow. And we actually competed with all of the IPS programs nationwide, but also programs that were located in New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Canada, and so on. So we're very proud of that. We've opened a drop-in center for covert consent decree persons who are suffering from mental illness, where they can go kind of relax and de-stress. We also offer employment assistance to them through that program, as well as just increasing their sense of well-being through community outings. They get a chance to go bowling, go to the movies, visit places in the community that they typically would not have access to. So those are some of the accomplishments of the agency.
Okay. So we are clearly in the presence of greatness, and I thank you guys again for taking time out of your busy schedules. And from what I have heard from both presentations, you have not given us everything, but we really don't have time to hear everything that you're involved in, and I thank you so much. So before we get into the meat of our discussion, just want to lay the groundwork. Dr. Saaphir, can you tell us what opioids are and their connection to illicit drug abuse?
Okay. So opioids are a naturally occurring opiate that's really derived from the poppy. And the drug, it includes such drugs as heroin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, oxymorphone, fentanyl, which I'm sure you've heard about, and methadone. Okay. Now, most of these substances all of these are controlled substances, which means that they have to be prescribed by a physician. Heroin is the leading street drug among and so it becomes an illicit drug through the distribution that occurs within the community. People selling fentanyl, which is basically all of these drugs fall within the class of a painkiller. Fentanyl is one that has been used to increase the potency of heroin, and unfortunately, fentanyl has been identified as one of the substances a lot of the opioid overdose deaths that we're seeing, in Chicago and Cook County.
Mhm.
So, things like morphine, codeine, all of those are, opioid-based. Some of them, are synthetic to the extent that they are man-made.
Mhm.
So, these drugs, like the oxycodone, the hydrocodone, those are synthetic drugs that have been made to act like other opiates.
Mhm.
So did that answer your question, Valerie?
Yeah, it does. And from what I've read, in many instances, people might start off with, say, some of the over-the-counter, not over-the-counter, but the drugs that are prescribed by their physicians, and then that becomes a gateway to the illegal drugs. I don't know, have you observed that in your
Absolutely.
line of work?
Yes. You see a lot of people who, following an accident or something, an injury where they're placed on, some form of painkiller, once they get to the point that they start developing tolerance to that drug where it's no longer effective, they go out and they look for drugs to create the desired effect that they're trying to achieve. In some cases, the physician gets to the point where they will no longer prescribe the drug, but because they're so highly addictive, it's hard for someone to, just stop using the drug. So they end up looking for some substitute, and typically, those are readily available on the street.
Mhm. So how has Bobby Wright historically addressed the issue?
Well, we do drug abuse prevention. We also provide, and prevention, includes going out into the schools and educating elementary and high school students about the effects of these drugs, making them aware of, what they are and how they affect them both physically and mentally. And we provide them with some tools to resist drugs, to learn how to basically walk away and say no through, role play and, various group activities. We try to increase their resiliency around, drug refusal. We also provide level 1 and level 2 substance abuse treatment. Level 1 is people who have met the criteria for drug abuse, but they haven't quite developed dependence. In other words, they're not experiencing withdrawal when they start to discontinue use of the drug. They're not using the drug in increasing dosage as a result of tolerance. You use a drug for a period of time and tissue dependence develops so that the body needs more and more of that drug in order to achieve the high that the person is seeking. Okay, so most of these drugs work on the part of the brain that's responsible for processing pain and for also facilitating the experience of pleasure, okay? Part of it's called the hypothalamus. And so you've got kind of a double whammy going there. On the one hand, you get this increased sense of well-being that's brought about by the drug, but you also get the elimination of any, negative experiences with regard to, feeling pain and what have you. So we do a lot of education around, what these drugs are and how they work. In our Level 1 program, our consumers come to attend an individual session once a week. They attend a group once a week. In Level 2, we have persons who have already met the criteria for drug dependence. And with them, we try to move them from wherever they are to achieving total abstinence from use of the drug. That process, we refer to as harm reduction. Unlike a lot of other programs, we don't put people on long-term methadone. We don't do any methadone treatment at all. In fact, a lot of people come to us because they're wanting to get off of methadone, and we take them through the harm reduction process. Some of the other work that we do is with the Drug-Free Coalition in West Garfield Park, where, again, we're engaged in educating young people about the effects of drugs and also providing alternatives for them that, give them some hope in terms of, being able to better their lives and go on and, pursue some of their dreams with regard to education, and yeah. So that's those are the things that we're doing now.
Okay, that's excellent. So, Donald, before we move on, did you have anything to add to what Dr. Saaphir just said?
Yes, just briefly, and this is primarily in response to what we're doing to address as an agency the issue associated with opiate addiction and trauma and, of course, mental illness and related disorders. HSI has been operating several programs to really address these concerns in our community. We have a halfway house. We have the Tabitha House Recovery Home, which with those two programs alone, it's a combined 60 beds available for men and women who, are battling addiction. We've got our intensive outpatient alcoholism and substance abuse treatment programs that Dr. Saaphir has already referenced, that Bobby Wright also does. And we can also say that we've been having the primary focus on, of course, our recovering citizens or ex-offenders, primarily through drug court. So as an alternative to being certainly detained or incarcerated, these persons have an opportunity to go into treatment, which many times they choose that option, and they're able to get themselves back on their feet. I should also mention that we work with Dr. Wilson on some bail bond reform because, of course, many people sitting in Cook County Jail could not make their bail, and we're in need of mental health and or, substance abuse and treatment. So we were able to, get that legislation passed with, Dr. Wilson taking the lead, of course, and we're able to get the people who had been identified, many, not able to make those bail fees to get the treatment that they needed. We also operate a PATH program, which works with the Illinois Department of Corrections, primarily providing intensive case management and treatment to persons identified with addictive disorders. And, of course, this helps to prevent any potential homelessness once they are discharged from IDOC.
Wow, this is some great stuff. And it's amazing. I know you guys, but I don't know you. We've been in contact with one another for years, and every time I talk to you, literally, I'm learning something new about what you do. So I'm learning right along with the audience, and I really do appreciate your time.
Our pleasure, Valerie, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talk about trauma all the time, Donald, but, I've come to learn from talking to different people that trauma means different things to different people. So for the purposes of this podcast, can you define trauma so that we're all on the same page going forward?
Sure. Well, fundamentally, trauma is an emotional response to any terrible event, like an accident, rape, natural disorder. And usually right after that traumatic event, our systems go through some type of shock and or denial. And one of the things that we realize after that episode is that, emotions are unpredictable. Persons may have flashbacks. We've heard, PTSD. Relationships may be strained. There may be a lot of different physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. So, we also realize that, when we look at these incidents, these accidents, these natural disasters, crimes, surgeries, deaths of loved ones, other violent events in our community, that, it really starts to include responses to what we consider to be chronic or repetitive experiences, such as child abuse, neglect, dealing with, concentration camps, battering relationships, etc. But, I also wanted to talk about, because I've been saying a lot when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, that really, in the case of the African Americans here in the United States, is more prolonged. It's been more, terrorism. It's been, prolonged suffering. And, many folks have categorized this as historical trauma. And when they talk about historical trauma, usually they're talking about a multi-generational trauma that's been experienced by the particular cultural group. So, we're looking at anyone, with families who have been marked by severe levels of trauma, poverty, dislocation, war. Suffering has always been a result. So we don't want to just look at trauma, especially in the African-American community, as something that occurs for the moment, when clearly a lot of what we're seeing in terms of battling addictions and substance abuse within our community has a historical frame, has an historical reference. And we got to look at it from the frame and the lens of historical trauma, because it's cumulative, it's collective, it's impacting our emotions, it's impacting our psyche, it's affecting, our ability to thrive as a people. So, when folks are quick to make or engage in what we call blaming the victims, we have to be very, very careful about that, because so much of what has occurred to us as a people traumatically has been intentional, it has been institutional, and it has been, policy-driven, by many different policies, like the war on drugs, which was primarily geared towards, people of color within the United States. So we have to look at trauma from all these various perspectives.
Okay, good. So it's not all in our heads.
No, not at all.
Or if it is in our head, somebody help put it there. Oh, goodness. I got to laugh to keep from crying, because that is very serious. And it's interesting, too. I think a lot of us are walking around with trauma, and I'll say myself included, for a number of different reasons, and we don't really always understand it, or we're not able to put our hands on it. And I think you really did a great job of describing what this thing is that just seems so nebulous.
Well, it's so important to realize that. Thank you. And let me just add that, with this type of trauma, we may also begin to internalize, some of those views of the oppressor, and we start to perpetuate a cycle of self-hatred and, a lot of different negative behaviors. So we want to look at, what happens as a result of that? Well, there's anger, there's hatred, there's aggression. A lot of it's self-inflicted. And, we want to be able to look at, the causes of these kinds of traumatic experiences and realize that we got to deal with the cause as well as look at different treatment approaches.
Okay, great. Dr. Saaphir, did you have anything to add to that?
Very little. Donald really covered that quite thoroughly. Just a couple of things I want to point out. A traumatic event doesn't always have to be directly experienced by the person. There's something that we call vicarious traumatization. So, you can hear the story of someone who went through this terrible thing and be traumatized by that. We human beings have something that other, lower primates don't have, and that is imagination. So, it's just through, having an image of this horrible thing in your head set off a physiological reaction in your body that's very much similar to the same kind of reaction the person had who witnessed or who was engaged in the traumatizing event directly. And I think that has some very broad ranging implications for what goes on in our community. A lot of us are traumatized by things that, we see displayed in the media. We're traumatized by things that, we hear other people talking about in the community, but we don't realize it. We don't recognize it as being traumatic. We may have some experience that appears to be unrelated to that experience of vicarious traumatization, where we don't make the link in our mind. Like, for instance, someone who, starts to have nightmares, okay? The nightmare might not be about a traumatizing event, but you're having nightmares now, whereas you weren't having nightmares before. So that's kind of the mind's way of, representing these things to ourselves symbolically in a way that, we can kind of, tolerate it, but it's disturbing, nonetheless. The other thing, and this is troubling for me, and that is that the experience of trauma, particularly in the African American community, has become normalized. Normalized to the extent that, some of us don't have the reactions that we used to have to trauma. To see it as, another person got shot, another person, someone else, was stabbed last night or whatever, and it's it's not really upsetting to us. We don't have the physiological reaction that I think is important, because those physiological reactions sometimes motivate us to take action. Okay, so we go through a series of cognitive avoidance strategies that help us to block the real effects of those traumatizing events. There's some research done, back in the late 70s and 80s by a psychologist. His name is Albert Bandura, where he had people watching other people being shocked. Okay, and he the physiological responses of the people who were observing, not the ones who were being shocked, but the ones who were observing the shock. The person in the other room they were watching through a one-way glass. The person in the other room wasn't actually being shocked. They were, actors. They were acting like, oh, that hurt. They were screaming and, yelling and writhing in pain and so on and so forth. And most of the people who were witnessing the other person who they believe were being shocked had increased heart rate. Their pulse rates were increased. They had an increase in what's called galvanic skin response, which is the ability of the skin to conduct an electrical current across the skin. So they showed that they were being vicariously traumatized by watching these other people whom they thought were being traumatized. The interesting thing about the research is that there was a subgroup of the population that didn't have those physiological reactions. And so being the thorough scientist that, he is, Bandura followed up with these people, and he asked them, was there something in particular, that was going on with you that you didn't, feel what other people were feeling? And they shared with him that they were basically tuning out, that they were thinking about something unrelated. One person said that he was, visualizing himself, on a beach. Another person said that he was thinking about his girlfriend, Now, these same strategies can be used effectively in terms of treating trauma, but at the same time, there are people who use maladaptive ways of engaging in this kind of cognitive avoidance strategy. So, the fact that it gets normalized, says to me that, there are some psychological things going on that people are doing, that aren't necessarily healthy. there's also the transgenerational communicational trauma that I think we need to be cognizant of. Through some work that I did with the Healthy Families of Illinois, we looked at research that showed that young children, even from infancy, were responding to nonverbal cues that they were picking up on the part of the mother who was being abused in a domestic violence relationship. So they were reading facial expressions, okay, and becoming upset by that. You know, whereas the mother says, well, no, they never saw him hit me. Right, they didn't see him hit you, but they saw the aftermath of it in your face. And so, you know, so now we have a whole generation of children who are growing up who have, you know, this trauma embedded within them. You know, someone once said that, you know, the mind might forget, but the body doesn't. Once it's stored, you know, it can be activated at some point in time. And I've seen people who, you know, were traumatized in childhood, totally blocked that out, and it manifested itself, you know, in their, you know, early 40s or 50s even.
Oh, wow. Well, there's so much more that we could talk about on that subject, but I want to bring us back. And before I do, I want to remind our listening audience that you're listening to Nonprofit U, and we're speaking with Donald Dew, the president and CEO of Habilitative Systems, Inc., and Dr. Rashad Saaphir, president and CEO of the Bobby E. Wright Comprehensive Behavioral Health Center. We'll now take questions from our listening audience in our chat room. Our call-in number is 347-884-8121. If you have any questions, please feel free to call. Again, that number is 884-8121. And you can also post in our chat room. If you don't have a listener-only account, you can do that. It's just a matter of clicking a button, and you'll have an account, and you can post in the chat room. I think this is a very good discussion. These men don't have a heck of a lot of time. They're busy saving the world, and if I were you, I would take advantage of every opportunity I could to ask them questions. You can see they're very transparent, very open and honest, and they have definitely made an impact to policy in the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, and in our local neighborhoods in the cities and suburbs. So at any rate, I just want to get back to Donald. I was reading a report by the Westside Heroin Task Force, and that task force, as you know, is led by State Representative LaShawn Ford. And he said the state of Illinois, in general, has experienced a serious decline in capacity for treating behavioral health issues. And when he says that, he's talking about from a financial perspective. He says the decline has been reduced by about 54% as it relates to state funding. At the same time, Chicago, which accounts for the largest number of opioid addictions in the state, has seen its capacity reduced by 61%. So we've got a greater share of the load trying to address it, but we're actually seeing our capacity diminished disproportionately greater than the rest of the state. So my question to you is, what's driving the decline in the state resources during a time in which the problem seems to be growing?
Well, there are just so many different factors that certainly can be attributed to this decline. But I do want to compliment State Representative LaShawn Ford and her colleagues for really shedding additional light on this issue and continuing to fight, for the what we consider to be substantial and sustainable funding, really to address these concerns in our community. And they have a hard time trying to look at, what is going to be the issue of the day, if you will, in the community that's going to receive its fair share of state funding. And let me just further illustrate what I'm saying. We've got issues within our community still around infant mortality, special education concerns, the need for child welfare services around foster care and adoption. And we just have to continue to remind ourselves that 9 times out of 10, whatever is the issue of the day is going to disproportionately impact the African American community. And we're competing with dollars, at one point in time, HIV/AIDS, competing with dollars, around veteran support services who are experiencing PTSD, dealing with the homelessness, now issue within the state of Illinois, in particular the city of Chicago. And I could go on and on and on, but just keep in mind there's always going to be disproportionate impact on the African American community. Now, we are aware that the Illinois Department of Healthcare and Family Services did introduce a new waiver, the Illinois Medicaid waiver, 1115 waiver, for behavioral health redesign. And the entire thrust, if you will, and intent of this proposal was to ensure that there was a greater emphasis on Medicaid funding for 6 primary areas as it would affect behavioral health. One was around supportive housing, looking at individuals with severe mental illness at risk of institutionalization or homelessness, who are currently receiving permanent supportive housing. Another one was for supportive employment services for individuals with substance use disorder, serious persistent mental illness, serious emotional disturbances, etc. Another one, major area, was around services to persons who were currently and are currently Illinois Department of Corrections, or what would normally call justice involved, within 30 days of release, trying to provide them with supportive services of a behavioral health nature there. We also were able to have included MAT, or Medicaid eligible individuals getting medication-assisted treatment, ensuring that they receive the appropriate referrals and services within 30 days of release. And when we begin to think about these kinds of supports, these kinds of waiver services, we realize that, it starts to make a difference and potentially could have significant impact within the community. It was even proposed that we increase the number of crisis beds. And, Bobby Wright, operates a program where they're providing crisis beds. HSI is providing supportive residential service beds. Even proposed in this waiver was additional intensive in-home services, such as respite care, to help support families and children between the ages of 5 to 21 with high behavioral health needs and or serious emotional disorders at risk of transition to higher levels of care. You just heard Dr. Saaphir speak about, how children are responding to issues around domestic violence, how they're getting, nonverbal cues of what's going on. Well, the bottom line is that the more we can get these kinds of waiver services identified, supported, and get some public and political will behind it, then yes, it can and will make a difference. But again, we're competing with all these other areas around funding in the behavioral health category. The only other thing I want to really point out, and the Kennedy Forum has been talking about this quite a bit, is that now with the whole push towards integrated health care, we have the opportunity to pay a lot more attention to behavioral health needs. I mean, heretofore, prior to this time, a lot of the emphasis has been on medical concerns, what's going on within the body. Well, we're just so happy that there's been so much more emphasis now on what's going on with the mind. And we've been saying increasingly that we've got to have consciousness over emotion. We've got to have the ability for folks to be able to cognitively embrace what's going on with the situation and impact the behaviors of their families, community, and loved ones. Because if we don't begin to do that in a very responsive, strategic way, we'll continue to get a lot of what we've been getting. So that's just one of the things that I think, Representative Ford and others are really pushing for, emphasizing we need to be involved with, and hopefully that kind of funding is in fact approved by Central Management Services, and we'll see some evidence of that as we move into fiscal year 19.
Okay, great. So, Dr. Saaphir, did you have anything to add to that? And it sounds to me like this is really the result of some significant heavy lifting on the part of the community as well. I don't know if you want to comment on what it takes from the community to be able to move legislation like that.
Yeah, just very briefly, I also, really commend State Representative Ford for the work that has been done on this issue and for providing the leadership in that regard. I always say that the proof is in the pudding, and it's a great plan. As Donald just laid it out, it's very comprehensive, provides an integrated approach to addressing a lot of these issues. But we have to, as residents of the community, we need to be aware of these things so that we can hold people accountable for following through. We've had a lot of great ideas and plans that have been put forth, but it doesn't always end up in our communities, and we have to make sure that we can engage people, in communities like East and West Garfield Park and Austin and North Lawndale, so that they are aware of these things and they can push, from the bottom up, because if the bottom's going to fall out. So Illinois has always been at the bottom of the rung in terms of funding for social services. We've had a fragmented system of care for a long time, and so the possibility that we would have this highly integrated system of care is very exciting, but we've got to make sure that we keep on top of this and make sure that the dollars that flow from it flow within the communities who have the least and those who are dealing with the most when it comes to, drug abuse, stress, trauma, and what have you.
Okay, I am going to ask a caller. There's a caller whose number is 773-209-4712. I am going to see if he or she has a comment. Sometimes people just call in because they can hear better by calling in. Sometimes people call in because they have a question. But caller at 773-209-4712, I'm just going to ask you briefly if you have any comments that you would want to make. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, this is
I can't. Hi,
hello.
How are you, Bonnie?
Yes,
I can hear you, Bonnie.
Good. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and thank you for all your expertise and all the work that you've been doing on this. My question is, I think Dr. Saaphir alluded to people coming to them to try to get off methadone. I'm really interested in if you have any statistics, in once people get on a substitute drug like Suboxone or methadone, what is the chance of them being able to get off that drug and completely clean? Is there any kind of a system that you guys have to help people in that situation?
Yeah, we, the statistics on people, getting off of methadone are very, very slim. It takes a really highly motivated and committed, individual to accomplish that. We use a process of harm reduction, where we get them to very gradually and very slowly detitrate the drug down to a point where, they're no longer in need of it. The problem is that the process of harm reduction takes such a long time, and that individual is dealing with a lot of stressors in the community that contribute to relapse. So the success rate is not that great. Most people, and some, I've had this debate with some treatment professionals who really believe that the best course of treatment is long-term maintenance. Because the relapse rate is also, fairly high. For those who do get off of methadone, they end up going back to using but we've had some limited success with, what I think is a very unique subset of the population who are highly motivated, and they come here with that specific goal in mind, and they're able to accomplish it.
Do you have any actual statistics?
No, I'm sorry, I don't. I don't have any statistics in front of me that I can refer to at this point.
I'm just wondering if there's enough attention being paid to getting these statistics, because I would think that if you're setting out kind of to give up drugs, if that's your goal, you've got a path to follow, and you have some hope of success that would be a motivating factor for people trying to get off drugs.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
I just wondered if anybody had recommended more research in this area. Maybe that's what's needed.
Definitely more research is needed. The opioid epidemic, is one that hasn't received a whole lot of attention. The use of methadone and the long range effects of being on methadone, has not received a lot of attention as well.
Yep. And what about Suboxone?
Yeah, Suboxone, again, that's fairly new. We're seeing some anecdotal data that suggests that, it's fairly effective in, preventing relapse on opioids because it really blocks, the effect of the drug. So if you're taking Suboxone and you do ingest the drug, you're not going to experience the high.
And then how do you get off of Suboxone? Because that, I understand, is more addictive than anything.
Well, again, that's the question. It's like some people say that, again, you need to give that person enough time that they can build up enough resistance, if you will, develop, a sober support network, really make some serious lifestyle changes, and then begin the process of, weaning them off of Suboxone. But, the treatment hasn't been around long enough to really see, how that works in the long term.
Okay, so thank you so much, Bonnie, for calling in. I really, really appreciate your contributing mightily to this discussion. We have less than 10 minutes left, and I really do want to talk about a special project. Dr. Saaphir, can you give your contact information out so Bonnie can follow up with you if she has further questions?
Okay. Yes, Bonnie, you can reach me at 773-722-7900, or you can email me at rsaaphir, that's Sam, AA, F as in Frank, IR, at bewcbhc.org. And I'm going to do something to change the length of that email address. It drives me nuts.
Okay, great. So I guess we can finish up with the discussion about a pet project for you guys, and I'm really excited to hear. And then, so we'll start with you, Donald. I think that you and Dr. Saaphir have both realized that the Westside, we do, in fact, need a savior, but that savior is us and nobody else. In fact, HSI has dealt with behavioral health, trauma, and public safety issues on many fronts. And one strategy you're working on in partnership with Dr. Saaphir and the Cook County Hospitals and Health System is the creation of the Westside Community Triage and Wellness Center. Can you give us an overview of this initiative? And then, Dr. Saaphir, feel free to chime in, too, after Donald gives his spiel.
Thank you.
Simply stated, this is a project, an initiative of good folks who care and love the community, come together to try and make serious impact and change occur. And it's happening in a way that has gotten the attention of some supporters like Cook County Health and Hospital System and the Behavioral Health Consortium of Illinois, and elected officials like Representative LaFord and Representative Lilly and Congressman Davis, and a lot of good folks coming together to say, and we cannot be remiss without mentioning our county commissioners, Richard Boykin and Dennis Deere, and as well as Robert Steele, before his untimely passing. All of these folks have been working at multiple levels, at the federal, state, local, county levels, to ensure that more resources come to the West Side. And, the stars basically aligned. Dr. Saaphir had the vision of creating a triage center on the west side of Chicago. He and I had a conversation, and, I mentioned that we had a facility available that had been shut down because of funding reductions for key programs in the state of Illinois. And so we had a building just sitting vacant there that was sitting in close proximity in West Garfield to Bobby Wright, between Bobby Wright's main headquarters and HSI. And, of course, county came together and said that they would be willing to work with us to launch this site. And we certainly saw the importance of bringing together, our expertise, the collective legacy of our respective organizations that could really make a difference and have some impact within our community. Looking at this notion of triage, we're basically trying to have a impact on reducing the recidivism rate. In fact, we're trying to reduce the numbers of folk who have been going into Cook County Jail when they really need to be getting treatment. We've been trying to have an impact on persons who have been going to the emergency room or institutionalized. And we're saying, look, we can get these services performed and done right here in the community. We don't need to continue to send our folk into institutions at greater cost to the state. It makes no sense. Why don't we serve our folks in our own community within our own resource? The other thing that I just want to quickly point out is that we have the opportunity to, of course, employ people from the West Side in this facility. And I know we're running out of time, so I want to, yield some additional time to Dr. Saaphir.
Okay, and thank you for that. Okay, Dr. Saaphir?
Yeah, thanks, Donald. In addition to what, Donald has indicated, yes, it's a cost to the state, but it's also a cost to the family, and the loved ones of those who are, being incarcerated at Cook County Jail and going into inpatient facilities. There's a type of trauma associated with that. So, by preventing some of these, persons from, being incarcerated and ending up in inpatient facilities, we're also, indirectly, addressing the issue of trauma. The final thing I want to say is that, Donald and I, decided that we couldn't wait for the triage center to open before we did something about the problem, particularly with the holidays approaching. So on December 22nd, we had what Donald called a call to action, where we had over 100 people in attendance. And we actually trained over 100 people in the administration of naloxone, or Narcan, if you will, to prevent opioid deaths during the holiday. At the same time, we launched a mobile triage program where we actually have a central call number that people can call, and someone will be dispatched to the situation where they're experiencing crisis and provide crisis intervention services, on the spot. We're working with the 11th District and the 15th District. Commander Johnson from the 11th District and Commander Cato from the 15th District have been very supportive of our efforts, and they've actually been utilizing our services. So we've got boots on the ground right now, and if someone, is experiencing a crisis related to substance use or a mental health crisis, I'd like to give you the number. It's 773-745-2620. Call that number. Someone will answer. They'll do a brief assessment of the situation, and they'll put you in touch with someone who can help. And if that's in your home, if it's at the emergency room, if it's at the police station, wherever you find yourself in crisis, we're here ready and willing to.
Okay, great. Can you repeat that number, and I'll make sure that I include it in the slide deck too.
773-745-2620. That's 24 hours.
Okay, great. Okay. So that's a helpline of sorts?
Yes, it is a helpline, hotline, crisis line, however you refer to it. Someone's going to answer, and we're going to send help.
Okay, so how should I label that? Is that through Bobby E. Wright, or is it through the Westside Triage Center?
Right. This is through the Westside Community Triage and Wellness Center. It's the Mobile Crisis Intervention Team.
Okay. I will make sure that I add that to the slide deck, so when people listen to this show and they're watching the slide deck, they will see the contact information there. Okay, so when does the Triage Center actually open?
Donald, are you there?
Yes, I am. And we're actually on a timeline right now to have it open early spring 2018. So we're targeting March of 2018.
Okay. So March of this year. Okay, awesome. Is there anything else that you guys want to add about this program? I know we're a little bit over, but I really think that this Triage Center is extremely important.
Well, the only thing that I would add at this point is that we also have a wellness component to it. Naturally, we're trying to reduce mental health stigma within our community. We're also trying to deal with the opioid addiction prevention efforts, and we also want to help, build resiliency and support for our children and families. Of course, as we've discussed today, we've been experiencing generational trauma, and we're at a point right now where we need to empower our families more. And so we're looking at providing additional workshop and educational seminars and trainings that empower and uplift and inspire, stress management, reduction exercises, mindfulness sessions, yoga, tai chi, any number of different activities and exercises and resources that, nutritional support, dealing with the social determinants of health, looking at employment, sports, housing, referrals, anything that has been problematic for our families in terms of them needing additional resources. We're looking at this being a resource center for our families as well.
Well, this is awesome stuff. So it sounds to me from that list of things you've given, you don't necessarily have to have a direct issue, with substance. I call it substance abuse. I think you guys have a new term for it. I can't remember what the term is, so forgive me if I'm lagging in my terminology with substance abuse. But it sounds to me like you don't have to have a quote-unquote problem to be a part of this wonderful new community. Is that true?
That is true. People experience stress on a daily basis at work, at home, even while they're playing. So we're just trying to make sure that people know. They may not be directly experiencing the stress or trauma, but may know someone that is. So they can come to the center and get information that can be informational and beneficial for those that they care about.
Right.
Okay, awesome. All righty. We've come to the end of our show, and I'd like to thank again Donald Dew and Dr. Rashad Saaphir for being our guests. Gentlemen, do you care to share any parting thoughts and tell the listening audience once more how they can get involved in this work and how they can reach you? So we'll start with you, Donald, and then we'll end with you, Dr. Saaphir.
Well, let me just say that we, again, thank you, Valerie, for this opportunity, and I'm especially happy that my colleague, Dr. Saaphir, and I have the opportunity to work together. I'm really encouraged that this effort is gaining momentum and support from various stakeholders, politically, socially, religiously. Several ministers have expressed interest in supporting our efforts, and this, really serves as a the situation. Both Dr. Saaphir and I have recently experienced hearing shots and actually seeing someone die outside of our respective facilities. I heard shots fired, looked outside the window, 32-year-old, African-American male is laying outside. This is not a movie. This is not a video game. People are dying in our streets, and there is a sense of urgency about this issue around mental health. And we've got to make sure that we support, embrace, and provide the kinds of interventions that can make a true and lasting impact within our community. Again, this situation did not develop overnight, and we've got to get busy without hesitation to make some interventions occur.
Yes. Okay, Dr. Saaphir.
Yes, thank you, Valerie, for having us on this afternoon. Donald is so thorough in his comments that, when he finishes talking, there's not much left to be said. And one of the things I appreciate in working with him, because I tend to be a bit more quiet and reserved. But one thing I want to say is that, we can't overemphasize the importance of mental health in everything that we do. It is the common denominator. I don't care whether you're talking about drug use, violence, domestic violence, all of those negative events that occur within our community have mental health implications. Not that people who are suffering from mental health-related disorders are committing crimes, because they're less likely to commit crimes than the general population. But, I just don't believe that some 15-year-old who would shoot another 15-year-old in the chest is experiencing good mental health at the time he makes that decision. And I think that we've fragmented it because we've stigmatized mental illness, okay? We have a lot of people who could benefit from mental health intervention that are not getting it. We've set up a service delivery system where you have to have a diagnosis and you have to meet medical necessity in order to get reimbursed. The problems that we have in our community go way beyond that. Okay? We need to be able to go out, and this is one of the reasons I'm very excited about, the Westside Triage and Wellness Center, because we're going to be able to reach that population that may not meet medical necessity, but it's necessary for us to be able to provide them with the tools that they need, to lead more productive lives, and that's what this is all about. This is why we get up and come to work every morning, and thank you for allowing us the opportunity to get the word out, and thank anyone who may be listening at this point, for tuning in and allowing us to share our thoughts.
Well, thanks again. And I'd like to thank our listening audience for listening to Nonprofit U Blog Radio Talk Show today. This episode will be available for download within about an hour. And be sure to tune in next week. We'll have David Young. David is the Director of Training for Housing Action Illinois. He'll talk to us about some of their capacity building programs. So until next week, I will talk to you later. And again, Donald and Dr. Saaphir, thank you, and you take care.
Thank you, Valerie.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.